Welcome, Wargamers, to a very special episode of Age of Sigmar lore as we continue the story thus far, a long-spanning series that covers all the high-level events within the Mortal Realms and is meant to act as a resource to get new folks caught up with the triumphs and defeats of the various factions across the Mortal Realms. Now, a few things up top. If you are completely new to the game, first of all, welcome. I highly suggest you go back to the first videos in this series. It's just the story thus far, part 1, part 2, and I have links to those in the description down below. They aren't terribly long. Start there, get caught up if you want the fullest possible picture of the lore, and forgive the shoddy quality as I was just getting into this when I started that series. But a quick recap of where we left off in part 2. Nagash had performed the Necroquake in a bid to seize ultimate power by killing everyone living in the realms and then summoning them back as undead under his command. This would have effectively purged all opposition in the mortal realms and had the added benefit of now starving out the Chaos Gods as they would no longer have mortals to corrupt or souls to fight over. However, thanks to a mix of bravery and ineptitude on the part of some Skaven, the ritual only kind of worked. It didn't kill everyone who was living, of course, but it did raise a ton of undead that were completely bereft of leadership. And in a way, broke the way magic works in the mortal realms. And those 2 points I put out there because that's how we got the Nighthaunt army and Endless Spells, respectively. But Nagash, ever the planner, had another card up his sleeve. His own army of demigods, constructs of bone and malice, called the Ossiarch Bone Reapers. And to Nagash's credit, for the first time since the Age of Chaos, a real army of any form of opposition to Chaos was now marching in the 8 points, seeking to topple the grip of Archaon in that realm. And while he didn't win initially, Catacros, the Mortarch of the Necropolis and leader of the Ossiarch Bone Reapers, settled into the 8 points for a nice, long, protracted siege. And those were the events depicted in the book Wrath of the Everchosen, which I also have coverage of. Now, that's the point where things hung for quite some time. We spent a lot of time fighting in that space, this most of 2nd edition, where we were actively feeling the effects of the Necroquake, like, storm vaults being revealed and such, new endless spells, and so on. But then the story took a gigantic step forwards as the new edition of Age of Sigmar began to dawn on us. And the series that took us on this journey from 2nd to 3rd were the Broken Realms books. This was a collection of campaign supplements that detailed the story of chaos and destruction lashing back with order and death trying to persevere separately. I do have a playlist with a full blow-by-blow for each book in that series. I do suggest you go ahead and check it out because for the rest of this video, for the story thus far, I'm just going to be covering the highest notes here and wrapping it up with what this means going forward. So we kick it off with Broken Realms Morathi. Archaon the Everchosen is trying hard to get into Azir, knowing that if he can hit Sigmar's home, then all of the other forces of order can crumble like dominoes afterwards. He was working on this process with his Gaunt Summoner, Eater of Tomes, and their plan was to use Varanite, which is the Realm Stone of the 8 points, and pour it all over a Gate of Azir, hoping that the warping and twisting powers of the Varanite would eat away whatever arcane lock Sigmar had sealed it with. Meanwhile, Morathi, head priestess of the Daughters of Cain, hears about all this and the mutating properties of this material catch her attention. She enlists the help of Sigmar to go into the 8 points and shut down the Varanite mines. But while there, she betrays him in secret and takes the Varanite for herself while her Stormcast entourage dies. Using the Varanite, she conducts a ritual that links herself with Slaanesh, at least his gullet, I suppose, and pulls a whole host of elven souls from the belly of the god of depravity into herself. With the mix of power and mutation, she finally achieves what she has always sought, Godhood, though it took her many backstabs and double crosses to obtain. Now we're going to pause that series of events because in Hysh, Realm of Light, another story thread lights up. Nagash has tried to send a Nighthaunt army from Shyish into the Realm of Light, specifically the town called Settler's Gain. Teclis shows up, shuts down pretty much the entire army single-handedly, and then poses an ultimatum to Nagash. Knock it off, or I'm coming down there. But you know what really doesn't work for Nagash, like especially a megalomaniac like him? Ultimatums. And so Nagash declines, and Teclis sends a massive army of Lumineth Realm Lords into Shyish. It wasn't meant to be a conquering force per se, but a show of strength to remind the great necromancer he's not untouchable. They raid, destroy several key monuments, sack some cities, and just basically tear a menace all across Shyish. At the same time, the Mortarchs are sent out to conduct some kind of ritual that will strengthen the Shyish Nadir, which is like the epicenter of where all the death magic is that he did for the Necroquake. But they all fail, so that plan was a dud. In the end, Nagash goes himself and has an awesome battle of the book nerds with Teclis, who is just barely able to repel him. Ultimately, at the end of the story, Nagash is struck down, collapsing, and is now resting back in Shyish. However, you can't ever truly kill death, and so he will be back. The next book in that series was Bellacor, and it sees some awesome events break out, and this is more of a direct sequel to Morathi. The Seraphon show up at the 8 points and begin kicking in the teeth of Eater of Tomes. This is like almost immediately after Morathi and her force went in there and shut down the Varanite mines. They also see the results of Archaon gaining entrance to Azir being a catastrophe, so they take out the head researcher of the Varanite. That's the Gaunt Summoner that Archaon has on the task. But then Bellacor, the first demon prince, smells an opportunity. He hates Archaon and looks at this, idle task of trying to open a door to Azir as weakness. He should be conquesting and ruling and, bringing chaos into the realms. So he goes on a bit of a side quest. And when I say side quest, what I mean is he learns how to chain reaction detonate realm gates from the Seraphon. And in the void where they open up, the realm of chaos bleeds through. This book is about the betrayal of the Everchosen and a new threat to the forces of order. Demons betray their own kin and act in service of Bellacor over Archaon. Bellacor himself even contracts the services of the Nighthaunt to act as a distraction for his plot. And ultimately he gets his way. A huge chunk of Chaman is basically detonated and blown up, and a perpetual cloud of twilight descends on the region, slowly spreading outwards. This is the power of the dark gods truly now infecting the mortal realms. The site of the main defense here is Vindicarum, one of the major cities of order and host to the Celestial Vindicators Stormhost. And while it does still exist in name, it is dang near leveled to the ground before Bellacor sounds a tactical retreat. This was an epic win for Bellacor and Chaos as a whole, much to Archaon's frustration about losing all of the soldiers, all of the demons, and all of the realm gates, and still not knowing how to open the gates to Azir. Now the last book here is Ragnose, which highlights the destruction aspect of the future story. Ragnose is a truly ancient being who achieved godhood far back in the Age of Myth. The Seraphon at the time saw his potential for destruction and sealed him in a stasis in a great mountain. He was like frozen in time in a prison inside a mountain. But from all the turmoil of the realms, meaning the Age of Chaos, the Realmgate Wars, the Necroquake, realm gates exploding, and some rituals that Alariel did, this prison began to kind of tear a bit, and so ultimately he was freed again, and he was mad and running wild across Gur. He had set his sights on the city of Excelsis and collected a large orc wall led by Gordrak and several tribes of Megagargants along the way. At the same time, Excelsis was dealing with a chaos infiltration as they were assaulted by a Skaven attack party and then a cult of Slaanesh that festered in the heart of the city. And this final book in the campaign series really does stick to the events within the city of Excelsis for the most part. Witch hunters root out Slaanesh from the city. Ragnose is essentially flung far out to a different part of Gur. He's definitely not dead, but it buys the forces of order time to kind of react to this new combatant. And the orc wall that went with Ragnose initially begins to fall apart once it breaches the walls of the city, and so Excelsius lives to see another day. Which is fantastic because it seems to be sort of like our anchoring point narratively for the next chapter as a grand chapter of Age of Sigmar. And so those are all the lore books that brought us from part 2 into part 3, this video. And there's a ton of stuff, of course, I didn't cover, like the Newborn of Slaanesh, the Deepkin involvement, Alariel's ritual, all of those things you can learn about in my Broken Realm series, or go support, Games Workshop in your local store and go grab one of these books. But now I want to talk about how those events set us up for what could possibly come next. What can we expect from the next chapter in Age of Sigmar lore? Well, it's pretty clear to us the time of Nagash is over and the era of destruction has begun, narrative speakingly, of course. The main story points are going to be centered around Gur, as was pointed out by the Warhammer community team during one of their previews. So that time we spent there in Broken Realm's Ragnose learning about Excelsius and the realm, it will be very relevant and very important. But more than a setting of events, the overall tone of this next chapter seems to be about expansion. The forces of order have weathered the storms of chaos, meaning the Realmgate Wars, and death, meaning the Soul Wars, and they seek to now spread out and settle with what are called the Dawnbringer Crusades, essentially military caravans meant to establish simple cities all across the land. But in direct opposition to this are the forces of destruction, the embodiment of the realms wanting to remain untamed, uncontrolled, and untethered. As order spreads across the realm, and it's just eking ever so, slowly, so too does disorder rise to meet it in equal measure. It's as if the first few chapters we saw in this, grand story is, chaos controls the land. Now death controls the land, and now destruction armies are collectively throwing up their hands and saying, nobody owns it. And it puts them in stark contrast to the factions of order who are trying to carve out a place for themselves. Now, at the moment of recording, we are still waiting for any new real material to drop in 3.0, like battle tomes and that kind of stuff, campaign material, all that. But that makes this a great place to leave you because you're caught up with the rest of us. And as more books and battle tomes drop, I will be absolutely sure to have coverage of them right here on this channel. So if you'd like to follow along, please hit the subscribe button and join us. This is such an exciting time for Age of Sigmar at the dawn of a new edition in a wild and untamed land full of tricks and monsters and orcs and all kinds of stuff. I'm so stoked to see what the forces of destruction have planned and how our heroes of order and champions of death and chaos are going to deal with it. Let me know your thoughts on the Broken Realms saga, essentially part 3 of our story thus far, and what you're excited to see in the future. Thank you so much for watching and following along. I look forward to seeing you in my next Age of Sigmar lore video. Thank you so much, and happy wargaming.